Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also the interim dean of the College of Fine Arts and Communication. Today, I'm talking with Alex Rodriguez from the class of 1984. Thanks for joining us, Alex. Hopefully I got that correct, 1984.
That's correct. It's a pleasure to be here, Buzz.
Yeah. And, just for those that may have been interested, you and I were here at WIU at the same time. You were a few years older than me, but we may have even had a class together.
Very possibly, yeah. Sure.
So let's get a life update. What's going on in your life and where are you at? What's going on?
Sure. So right now I'm with the Chicago Tribune on the editorial board. I've been on the board coming up on 6 years now. It's a wonderful experience. It's a very different kind of journalism that I've been accustomed to in the past because, as you probably know, when you're on an editorial board, you are the institutional voice of the newspaper, you and the other board members. And different board members have different functions, but I'm an editorial writer. I do a lot of editing as well on the board. And so it's opinion writing, but it's opinion writing not imbued with your own opinion. It's the Tribune's opinion. And that's a very specific, important concept. And so when I write, I have to think about what the Tribune thinks about a given subject, whether it's Syria or Trump, Biden, Lori Lightfoot, it doesn't matter. And so it's a transition to get into that mindset. But that's where I'm at right now. It's very happy here at the Tribune.
Great. We'll talk about how you mature and grow into that sort of role. And we're going to go through which I've heard your story before, Alex, when you came and talked to our students before, and it really is amazing. So let's start all the way back in early times. You grew up on the north side of Chicago. What was life like, and how do you think that life growing up on the north side impacted your personal development?
I really loved growing up in the north side, and I loved growing up in a city. Later on in life, when I had kids, I had my kids when we were abroad, but I love the fact that they were able to grow up in a city because cities are diverse. There's so much energy in cities, and so I just remember as a kid, loving those. We didn't move to the suburbs until I was 10. So those first formative years growing up in a city, like I said, just the vibe of the city was, something that always stuck with me. Not to foretell what we're going to talk about, but, even as a kid, I was a very curious person and very into reading a lot and reading the Chicago Tribune. I remember reading as a boy. And so, just from the standpoint of, latching onto the city newspaper and developing a relationship with it and turning to it every day, that started from a very young age for me.
Were you a sports fan? You must have gone to some Cubs games.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We used to walk from, lived on Grayson Broadway, Ruby Field's not that far away. So we'd walk to Cub games, very big Cubs fan, lifelong Bears fan. So yeah, sports always very big in my life. I played football as a young kid. Even now, I'm a massive Bears fan. So, which works.
It's a curse.
Yeah.
So in high school, Alex, what kind of things did you like to do? Were you finding what kind of strengths that you had? You must have been involved with writing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Paradoxically, I was not a school newspaper. I actually had no designs or aspirations to go into journalism in high school. It was not on my radar screen. I was actually kind of unsure where I wanted to go. Initially I thought, well, Western, the school that I decided on, has a good business school. And I think that's the direction I should go. And so, initially as far as high school is concerned, I liked writing a lot, but I didn't do it in any structural way. It was just, for a research paper, for assignments in classes. But once I got to Western, I became a little bit disillusioned with the career track associated with business. I just thought it was not me. And so I decided my sophomore year to change my major to journalism. And very big, right turn.
Yeah.
But I absolutely don't regret it. And actually, I remember thinking to myself, we get one shot in this life, and I did not want to have any regrets. And I knew that I had this passion I realized I had a passion for journalism and reading newspapers every day. And I just thought, well, I got to give this a shot. And so I changed my major and went that way.
So did you take some classes first? Did you get involved with the Courier? How did that sort of develop to where you started to explore that area?
Yeah, so my sophomore year, because I changed my major, I just went down the journalism track. There were a couple of professors there that were mentors for me, Jay Lee, and also very much Declan McLean. He was from the Boston Globe. And I just remember once I took a couple classes with him, he came in with that institutional knowledge of what it's like in a newsroom, what it's like to be on deadline, what it's like to be thrown an assignment that you know nothing about, and you as quickly as possible have to write authoritatively about it. And he conveyed that, in a way that only someone who has been in that newsroom can convey it. And I got that sense from him right away. And so, I just, as soon as I changed my major, I just took, as many journalism classes as I could and went down that track. And one thing that was, in hindsight, very nice, was that once I was no longer a business major, I didn't have to take all of those math classes, calculus. I just struggled in all of those classes that are associated with the business track. And that was a nice little offshoot from that.
Yeah, and I still see Deckel around Macomb, and he's very active still. And at that time, I remember also having a class with him and thinking when he gave feedback, you're getting edits from somebody that knew what they were doing. And so I really felt the same way. Very respected newsman of his time.
Absolutely, yeah. The only thing I remember, Buzz, was, and I don't know if you ever encountered this, but there were a couple of occasions where I was working on a story that he had assigned, and I was unsure about something, and I called him up at night. Not like that. If you ever see Deckel again, just remind him of those very irritating calls that I made to him, because I was working on the story and I was like, I'm not sure about this, and I'd call him and he just was not happy about getting phone calls at night.
That's so unusual because everything was landline at that time, and I'm sure he was. It's not like today with young people and their cell phones, and but so that really you weren't afraid to call your professor.
No, because the assignment was due the next day, and I didn't want to get it wrong, so I needed that little bit of extra help. Wasn't happy about it.
What other memories do you have? Other students or things that you'd like to do while you're in Macomb?
The one thing that really comes to mind is, like so many people in their college experience, it was all about the friendships that were so important to you at that time. but then endured. I still have buddies who I get together, at their summer places in Wisconsin, or, we get together in Chicago to just reminisce. But I maintain those relationships, and there's something to be said for those college relationships that can survive the decades. And so that to me was priceless, and the venues there were, iconic. The Change of Pace was a small bar, that you probably remember.
Yeah.
There were other small bars. There was a place called the Moon. I don't know if those places exist anymore, but Western was this little world where with your friends, you just enjoyed this little universe, and it was a small little town far away from everything else, so it certainly was a bubble, but it was a really comfortable place, made a lot of fun, not just by the college experience, but by the friendships.
Yeah, it's really nice that you still keep in touch with all those people, because I think that, for our students that are currently here, they're in this period of still developing as an individual and finding themselves, and yet, finding good people to be around at this period of time really helps set you out as a path, and kind of anchors you to the rest of humanity for a long period of time. And I really think says a lot about the type of people you're hanging out with at the time.
Absolutely. Very true.
So, Alex, when you graduate, you're looking for a job, and you must have been looking to get back to Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, the jobs that were open to me at that point were in community journalism, suburban Chicago. And these were smaller papers. First, Northwest Herald based in Crystal Lake, and then the Daily Herald in Arlington Heights afterward, a larger suburban enterprise. And the Daily Herald is where I certainly started to polish my work. At the Northwest Herald as well, but it's a wonderful paper. It's very small. But at the Daily Herald was a paper that the Tribune at the time saw as genuine competition. Sometimes not so much, because the Sun-Times has always been just exclusively a Chicago paper, a city paper. But Tribune certainly had a massive footprint in the Chicago area, and the suburbs were a very big market for them. And so they took the Daily Herald very seriously. And those first a couple of papers were covering village boards, covering local issues. But it's all about, and I'm sure your students know this, it's all about your body of work and the enterprise work that you do. And I quickly learned that the more enterprise work that you do, beyond just what you're assigned, the more you'll get noticed. And that's what happened. I just, as I worked, I really tried to do work that, took issues deeper. And as I said, we're much more enterprising. And it got noticed by, from the Northwest Herald, got noticed by the Daily Herald. And then again, when I was at the Daily Herald, the Sun-Times noticed me and moved on up.
So, I want to just to hang on there for a moment. Early on, those early assignments that you had as a reporter, you're kind of learning to, put different tools into your tool belt. Everything from dealing with individuals that are public officials, or, trying to craft stories for the first time and not have a teacher kind of tell you what's right or wrong. You have an editor that you probably had to run things by, but for the most part, you are sort of developing your own voice and understanding to trust yourself, right? I'm sure at some point in time, you're building up that confidence that you know what you're doing in the profession.
Absolutely, it's very true. And the other thing that I learned in those first couple of jobs, especially at the Northwest Herald, was the importance of sourcing, of developing people in the community who you could turn to for what was going on, but also were reliable voices, were reliable sources, were people that were really in the know. And one very quick anecdote that came to mind is, I believe this is a story that got me noticed by the Daily Herald. There was a major fire at a paint resin manufacturing plant in a town called Carpentersville. It's a suburban Kane County town, and caused a lot of damage. Neighborhoods were evacuated because of the plumes of chemical smoke. And but so after covering that, I got to know the Carpentersville fire chief pretty closely, and he had, because of his position, had access to a lot of fantastic, eye-opening documentation about the history of this company, Cargill, along the Fox River. This was literally on the shoreline of the Fox River. And meeting with him and a series of interviews and meetings, and him showing me these documents, led to these stories that I did about this legacy of pollution associated with this company that really was was unknown and was really hidden. I did a series of stories that really exposed the level of pollution. And this specifically had to do with groundwater pollution, the very toxic chemicals that this company was using in the manufacture of paint resins. These chemicals would make their way into the Fox River. And the Fox River downstream is a source of water for Elgin and for other communities. So at that very early point in my career, the importance of developing reliable sources that you could turn to, and developing those relationships, that was invaluable at that very early stage.
So you get this opportunity to move to the Sun-Times, and was that also just as a general assignment reporter?
Yes, yeah. Initially general assignment, and that was a really wonderful chapter in my career, because I had never covered a city before, and covering a city is very different. It's a lot, and it's much bigger than the Lake in the Hills Village Board, or the things that I was covering before, and so a little bit daunting, but it provides such a bigger palette of subject matter, and more is at stake. So it really forces you to up your game, and you get editors at that level. I mean, sometimes the quality of journalism and the quality of editors was just top notch, and I learned so much from my colleagues, my other peer reporters, as well as editors there. And so, it was a lot of it was about covering things that were really that mattered so much, and mattered to Chicago, mattered to the Chicago region, the state, and even I ended up covering national stories at the Sun-Times. I had a very strange year. I forget if it was 95 or 96, where there was a series of commercial airline crashes in the United States, in Pittsburgh, and then North Carolina, and then also Roselawn, Indiana. And I covered the first one. They sent me out there, the one outside Pittsburgh, and then I became the airline crash reporter because I had done a decent job. And then there was another one. I think the next one was in North Carolina, and then the third one in Roselawn, Indiana. And so that's a story where it's national in scope. It's requires a lot, because you're dealing with the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. You're you're dealing with horrible tragedy and victims, families of victims that are in a very difficult emotional state, and so a lot more at stake. And that also was daunting, but it really helped me in terms of honing my craft and understanding and being given an assignment that seems really too big for you, but then not getting intimidated by it and just finding the right way to do it.
Interesting, because it shows, as you said, that you're ready to handle bigger stories, and it shows that you're willing to travel, which is sort of, foretelling of what would happen in your career. When you think about it, just, they must have been thinking, what can we throw at this young person here and he just keeps taking it on. Did you think at some point in time when you're there, and also later in the Tribune, that you're kind of pinching yourself thinking, okay, I can't believe that I'm working here in Chicago for the big papers? Absolutely.
At the Sun-Times, in the newsroom, a couple of desks away, there were Pulitzer Prize winning reporters. And I ended up editing at my last year, the Sun-Times. I ended up being the assistant Metro editor. And I, when I first arrived at the Sun-Times, I revered these reporters and these, couple of them, as I said, were Pulitzer Prize winners. And then they were on my staff, and I had to edit them. And it was, it was intimidating, and yet, like I said, they're professionals, they're pros, and all they want is sound editing that doesn't derail their writing, doesn't take away their voice, but also ensures that you've got this beautiful, polished story that gets in print the next day. So it was and the other thing about working at the Sun-Times was, it was the underdog. The Tribune was at that time, the Tribune was massive. It's a multimedia, multi-billion-dollar company, foreign bureaus all around the world, national bureaus, a DC bureau, and the Sun-Times was the other city paper. And I'm at the Tribune now. I love the Tribune, but I loved it when we were at the Sun-Times and we used to beat the Tribune. And on the city level, covering city council or covering city issues, we frequently beat the Tribune.
So was it at the Sun-Times, the Tribune, that you became part of the team where you did get involved in some reporting that won the Pulitzer Prize?
Yeah, that was at the Tribune my first year at the Tribune. So made the jump to the Tribune, and very quickly I was just there 2 or 3 months, and Anne-Marie Lipinski, the executive editor, was very interested in tackling this very large series that looked at commercial aviation, but especially from the standpoint of the airlines, and specifically the airlines that had O'Hare International Airport as their hub, and looking at the issue of how chaotic and dysfunctional the entire national commercial aviation system was, but how that dysfunction was exacerbated by the airlines themselves, that they would overbook, they would overschedule flights, cram in so many flights into a given interval during the day, so that if there was one small little glitch somewhere, whether it was in Cincinnati weather or, a mechanical problem in Dallas, whatever, because O'Hare was a hub, it just had this ripple effect, and it just caused delays throughout the system. And so, they asked me to be part of that project. I did a lot of the, at the time, I did do some computer assisted reporting with spreadsheets. And so I did a lot of the work that was associated with taking the airline schedules and doing the number crunching and the data analysis to assess, this overbooking of flights. And so, and then I did write I think it was 6 installments, 6-part series, and I wrote the last part. And yeah, that was, yeah, I was just there a few months, and it was a fantastic, difficult project. It involved, dozens of reporters. I mean, it was a very big project, and so a lot of moving parts. And
but you were the airline expert. We've already established. They had somebody that knew all about the airlines.
Yeah, 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 and the thing is, that kind of story is wonderful because it has so much resonance with all of us, right? We've all been sitting on a tarmac in a plane that's, going nowhere. We've all been like, rushing to a business meeting or whatever, and all of a sudden, you've got to, reconfigure because your flight is delayed or whatever. I mean, it affects everybody. And so that was something that was really wonderful about that project, was the relevance to everyday life.
So how do you transition from being a reporter to becoming a foreign correspondent?
It is a very big transition, but one of the first things that I tell, and I did, when I spoke to your students a while back, I told them that in the end, the same skills that you bring to any beat or any assignment, you bring to foreign correspondence. You have to learn a very different part of the world, and sometimes a different language, and certainly different people, different culture. But in the end, in terms of the basic skills of being a journalist, those all matter just as much when you're a foreign correspondent as they do when you're covering, Chicago City Council. So that part, if you have to be good at the basics in order to be good as a correspondent. But the thing that I did not have going for me when I became a foreign correspondent was, I was asked to go to Moscow and asked to be the Tribune's Moscow bureau chief, covering everything that used to be the Soviet Union. So Russia, and then the 14 other former Soviet republics. But I knew nothing about Russia at the time. I didn't speak the Russian. I didn't speak a word of Russian at all. So I was very much a clean slate, being assigned out there, being asked to go out there. I definitely said yes, because it's a
no hesitation.
No hesitation, because wow. I didn't have kids at the time, so I only had to convince my wife, and my wife was, to her credit, totally on board with it. This new adventure. But I even though I had no aspiration, never thought about becoming a foreign correspondent, as I was, in my career, once it was in front of me, I absolutely said yes, because I thought, being thrown into something as daunting and challenging as Russia, covering Russia, trying to understand it and then write compellingly about it. I love that kind of challenge, and so I didn't hesitate. I only needed my wife's, okay, and she was totally on board with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you survive not knowing the language? Just even the basic stuff, Alex, is, it's one thing to be able to do a job, but just to exist in another place when you don't know the language.
Yeah, the language is a very big hurdle. With respect to the work itself, most foreign correspondents, they rely on a translator.
Okay.
And the job, the nomenclature is fixer, an assistant who does translation, but also does everything else in terms of like arranging your flights, your hotels, often does a little research as well, and so does so much more than just translation. And so that person becomes a critical staff member within your bureau. There are correspondents, I'm sure, that, already know the language going into the job, going into the assignment. And so they, it's a boon for them if you already know the language. First of all, it saves money, not having to hire a translator or a fixer. But secondly, it certainly makes interviews easier, that where rather than, the interplay of a translator translating the question and then translating the answer back, you can just have this very direct conversation with your interview subject. So I hired a translator, a fixer, to do that work. So the language part of it, with respect to the work, that was always covered by the Tribune fixer. But living in Russia, it's not like in Moscow, it's not like other European cities where there are many English speakers there. At least at the time when I arrived in 2002, if you walked into a restaurant or a store, if you didn't know Russian, you were lost. Mm-hmm. You were, with a menu, you were just pointing at things and, hoping it was whatever you got was edible. But so you have to learn the language just to live there, to survive. So yeah, we did some, many papers that have foreign coverage. They give their correspondents what is known as language immersion first, a period of time for them to not work, but just learn the language itself. And so I got 6 weeks of language immersion, which, with as complex of a language as Russian is, that's not enough. So I really learned more Russian there, living there. And, once I got Russian friends, that really helped. And reading, watching Russian television, reading the newspapers, and just living in Russia, I just learned it being there. And then that also helped, especially with respect to the interviews, because now I could, understand. I could actually hear. I wasn't getting a filtered version of what this interview subject was saying. I was hearing it directly. So, but the bigger aspect to being a foreign correspondent was the place itself. The government, the authority there. In this case, it was Putin. The people, the history. All of that is it's very big, and it's a lot to consume and digest and start to develop a comfort zone with. It takes a little while to actually develop that institutional knowledge so that you can start to feel very comfortable writing authoritatively about a place like Russia and a person like Putin. And it took me about a year of writing before I really felt comfortable and not having to look things up all the time, And so that's a very big part of the job is doing your research, and especially developing sources within Russian society, whether they were analysts, whether they worked for NGOs, whether they were government officials, but Russians, in places of knowledge that could really help you understand this very fascinating but complex place, and a very fascinating but complex figure, Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and I'm sure in some ways you stuck out like a sore thumb to the rest of the people that you were a U.S. journalist. That there was probably some fear of being, who was speaking to you and what was being said.
Absolutely. And with Russians, especially Russians and their relationship with Americans, at first there's, an iciness, a distance. And whether it's an interview subject or even just, somebody who you're starting to develop a friendship with, it takes a little while, but, it's a lot of it with respect to getting Russians or Kazakhs or Ukrainians or wherever else I had to talk to, getting them to open up to you. A lot of it has to do with that fixer that you are relying on, that local journalist, to help facilitate the interview, to set it up, to translate. But often that's why that job is so important, because you want that fixer to be someone who is not just knows the local language very well, but and speaks English very well, but is well sourced. Is actually like plugged in, and so that can really help in terms of, if I'm doing a story about xenophobia in Russia, for example, finding a Kyrgyz fixer who can who can find me those victims of xenophobia in Moscow, for example, and can like have these interview subjects feel comfortable talking to an American journalist. That's all like a lot of setup that has to happen before even the interview happens. And so that's crucial to the job.
And how long were you in Moscow and before you decided, and then how did you transition to your next position, which was in
Pakistan? Yeah. So it was 7 years in Moscow. And then in 2009, Sam Zell had bought the Tribune and had shut down the Tribune foreign bureaus because with the notion in mind that it was somewhat duplicative. I mean, there were the LA Times, which was also a Tribune Company newspaper at the time, had foreign bureaus as well. And so he decided, let's just have LA take care of foreign coverage. But they asked a couple of the Tribune foreign correspondents to come over to the LA side and come to the LA Times and continue as foreign correspondents. And so I was one of them. And so the LA Times asked me to go to Islamabad, Pakistan, to be their Pakistan bureau chief. So that was a very different transition and very daunting in a very different way, because I had two kids who were 4 and 6, two daughters. And at the time in 2009, Pakistan was a very dangerous, chaotic mess. The Pakistani Taliban had gotten within an hour's drive of Islamabad, the capital. There were suicide bombings everywhere, even in the capital, Islamabad, where we were planning to move to. So there was a lot of soul searching that my wife and I had to do at the time to, first of all, even take this job. Is it secure enough? Can we create a secure enough bubble for our family to live? And then the side of it for me that was difficult to wrap my head around, and I had to really strategize how I was going to deal with this was security from my standpoint. Because my family, even though Islamabad, when that first year it was really crazy, and then after a few months it did start to quiet down. But for me, I had to go to Peshawar, which is on the edge of the tribal areas where all the bad guys were, and Taliban and Al Qaeda, and Karachi, and all these really on various levels pretty dangerous places. And I had staff too. I had a fixer and a driver. And they had families, so I had to think about their security as well. So that part of it was really, we always had to, on any assignment, especially an assignment in a dicey area, we really had to do our research ahead of time, our vetting of the local journalists we would use who would help facilitate, set up interviews. We had to really be careful about making sure that the place that we were going to go to, that it was about as safe as possible, and that we had minimized as much risk as we could. You can never get rid of all risk when you're in these places, but you just try to minimize the risk so that you can get the job done. And keep everybody safe.
Alex, when you told this story, I think when you visited, I became anxious just listening to it, because I'm thinking it's like watching a movie where you see the star of the film, and you're worried about that person the entire time, just waiting for something that it seems like it's going to be inevitable that would happen, because we go about our jobs so often here in the US and never think about the things that you had just mentioned there, the safety of yourself, the safety of the people you're working with, trying to make sure that just in order to do your job, you have to consider all these other factors that are just happening because that's the way that country is.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a story I did briefly that where I had to really think about making sure that the people I hired were not going to set me up, and the venue of the interview was safe enough. It was I'll run through this very briefly, but I was very intrigued with the primary material that the Afghan Taliban would use as explosive material in their roadside bombs. And roadside bombs were the primary killer of American soldiers in Afghanistan during the war. And the primary explosive agent was a fertilizer called ammonium nitrate, which McVeigh used in Oklahoma City. And almost all of the ammonium nitrate fertilizer that the Afghan Taliban got was from Pakistan. It was being smuggled from a couple of major fertilizer companies in Pakistan. And so I wanted to do the food chain of that. How, from the start, from the point that it's manufactured, how does it get to across the border and smuggled into Afghanistan to the Afghani Taliban, and why? How is the Pakistani government letting this happen? Because the American government was livid about this. They wanted the Pakistani government to crack down on the smuggling of ammonium nitrate. So the part of the story that required me to examine how this material got over the border through the Khyber Pass and from Pakistan through customs agents over the border into Afghanistan, I had to talk to a smuggler. But talking to a smuggler is talking to somebody who obviously has connections to the the Afghan Taliban, the bad guys. And so I had to find local journalists in the city's called Peshawar, which is on the cusp of the tribal areas. It's the major city outside of the tribal areas. I had to find a journalist who could find me the smugglers, who's reliable enough to actually find me a legitimate smuggler who was willing to talk to an American journalist and would tell me everything that he could, and B, a local journalist who would not set me up, would not ostensibly arrange an interview where all of a sudden I'm in a room and I'm surrounded by guys with Kalashnikovs. So we had to do a lot of vetting for that. We had to talk to several journalists in Peshawar. Is he in the know? Does he know the right people? Is he reliable? Is he someone that I can trust? And went through several screenings until we found the right person who found me the smuggler. And then I had to go to Peshawar and into this pretty part of the city that was not too nice, and went into this office building, and walked into the second floor of this building and into a room, this darkened room where there was no furniture at all and just rugs on the floor. And I sat down, my fixer sat down next to me to translate. And then the smuggler walks in, and that's a point in time when I was, certainly heart in my throat. My God, there's only one doorway, one exit here. But we started the interview, and he really opened up. He talked about how the customs agents were corrupt, and how much, and the money that they would take and the amounts that would go over the border. And so he laid it all out. And it was page one on LA Times, and I believe it was later on cited in congressional testimony. But that was an assignment where I was, I needed to make sure that all my I's were dotted and my T's were crossed, not just from the journalism standpoint, but from the security standpoint.
Holy cow. It's just amazing. And I think at some point, Alex, did you say, okay, this is enough? Or, and looking back now, since you have some time away from it, what were some of the joys of it?
Oh, many, so many. Well, the joy of seeing that story appear, page one LA Times, I was over the moon about that. This kind of journalism was, I loved all chapters of my career, but to one day you're covering a Putin press conference, and then the next week you're going to Kazakhstan to do a story about falconry, right? Or you're covering, then another time you're covering one of those color revolutions, the Orange Revolution, where the Putin candidate was exposed as just a puppet of Putin, and in a populist uprising, got rid of this Putin candidate, and democracy won out. Those kinds of stories, those kinds of experiences are golden, and I'm just blessed to have that be part of my a chapter in my career. But I loved going to a faraway place, understanding it, and then writing compellingly about it. I wouldn't have a problem doing it again.
That's and looking back on it, Alex, and seeing how you just continued to grow over over this period of time since you left WIU. I'm not surprised that now what you're doing now as an editorial board member, trying to, again, you have, I think, the maturity, the knowledge, the experiences that have happened to you over this period of time, to where it must help you do what you're writing about now in your editorials.
It absolutely does. And we do a lot of opining about what's happening in the world. I just wrote today about Putin in Ukraine. So it certainly informs my writing now, and especially these international stories. For example, writing about, I did a lot of writing about Syria when the civil war was at its height. I did that writing on the editorial board, the Tribune's take on that. And even though I had never been to Syria, never covered it as a correspondent, just covering war and covering fundamentalists and terrorism and that part of the world, it really helped me write about Syria as an editorial writer. So even if the thing that I was writing about on the editorial board wasn't a place that I covered when I was a correspondent, just that sensibility of being a correspondent really helped inform my editorial writing.
Well, it's an amazing journey, Alex. And I always like to end with what kind of recommendations you have for students, because, just the last thing we're talking about here is this idea of that, you have to have a certain level of maturity to be an editorial writer, but to get into the journalism profession, what kind of recommendations do you have for a young person?
The first thing that comes to mind is two things. I think at a very innate level, you have to have massive curiosity. You really have to want to know about things, and and not on a superficial level. You have to want to be able to like understand things at a very deep level, because I think that's very important. Especially nowadays, where there's a lot of disinformation out there, and journalism is more important than ever with respect to nuance and the full complete story. So I think you have, if you're thinking about a journalism career, you have to be just by nature a curious person. You have to love writing. I mean, writing's tough. I mean, I look at a white screen all the time, every day, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say, or, I've really, and so you have to like just feel comfortable with that lack of comfort. You have to feel comfortable with being unsure. Well, what do I want to say about this? And it'll come to you, and the way it'll come to you is your reporting. I mean, you just have to report out the story completely and get more information than you need, so that you have this bounty of information, and that you can glean your writing from that. But there's nothing worse than sitting down and writing a story and you see holes in your reporting, and you're like, oh, I should have talked to this person or that person. So those are very fundamental things. The other thing I would mention is, as aspiring journalists get into their career, building your body of work is so important, because it's how you get noticed. And that's how I kind of moved up, was not necessarily, going to the Daily Herald or going to the Sun-Times or going to the Tribune and saying, hey, hire me. No, it was they saw my work and they called me. And that's the great thing about journalism, is it's if you're good, you're very visible and your work is out there. People will notice. So that body of work is so important. Just build up that portfolio of clips, that body of work. Make sure that there's a lot of enterprise in it, because it shows editors who are thinking about you that you will go beyond just, what he said and she said, that, you'll dive deeper.
Well, it's been such an inspirational story to hear your career and in life, Alex, and I'm so thankful that you shared it. And I think there are so many stories yet that to be told. I mean, I think we just scratched the surface here today, and it's because I know that during different times you've always been very generous with your time to speak to our students. We appreciate that here at the university. But as I said, just inspirational, because as you've been an individual that has always done the extra and raised your hand and been willing to do that extra bit. And I hope that a young person sees this and decides to also take that extra step that you did.
Wonderful. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a really, I'd love to help out as much as I can. And so the door is always open for me to do this kind of thing.
Well, thanks again, Alex, for being on the podcast. Thanks to all of our weekly viewers out there. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast or want to recommend somebody, just send me an email. We want to hear from our alums. We hope that you also continue to watch and listen to the podcast, and really appreciate everyone's support. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.